Okay, let's get started. So in this video, we are going to test the createNewTransaction method that we made in the previous video. And just as a heads up, this is going to be a pretty cool video, and you will really start to see how powerful a blockchain can be, and you will better understand how blocks and transactions work with each other and how they are recorded in the blockchain. So this video is going to be a lot of fun. So we're going to test our createNewTransaction method in our test.js file. So in our file, we've required our blockchain, and we've made a new instance of our blockchain called Bitcoin that we are logging out at the end of our file. So the first thing that we're going to want to do in our test.js file is we're going to say bitcoin.createNewBlock. And if you remember, this method takes in a nonce, which is simply a number, and it takes in a previous block hash. For now, we're just going to make some nonsense hashes because that will work just fine for our testing purposes. And it also takes in a hash parameter, which we're going to make this value right here. Cool. So now we want to do bitcoin.createNewTransaction to test our createNewTransaction method. So our createNewTransaction method takes in three parameters: an amount, a sender, and a recipient. So let's plug those in now. We will say that the amount is 100 Bitcoin. The sender is going to be an address, which is simply, we'll call this address right here. And the recipient is also just an address, which we will make that address right there. And actually, just to simplify this, let's take the first four letters of the sender and call this person Alex. And the recipient we will call Jen, just so that we can identify these addresses a little bit easier. In reality, you would more than likely not have this kind of name appear at the beginning of an address. This is just to make it easier for us to reference these addresses. Cool. So let's see what we have at this point. We have our Bitcoin blockchain, and the first thing that we do is we create a new block. And then after that, we create a new transaction. And then we log out our blockchain. So when we run this test.js file, we should expect to see our Bitcoin blockchain, and it should have one block in the chain, and it should have one transaction in the pending transactions array, which you can see right here. This transaction that we created should be in the pending transactions array because we have not mined or created a new block after creating this transaction. So let's save this file and let's run it to see what we get. So we will say node dev/test. Cool. So we get our whole Bitcoin blockchain logged out. And we can see our chain right here, which has the one block that we created in it right here. That's good. And then in our pending transactions property, we have one pending transaction in the array, which is good, which is this transaction we created right here. Cool. So how can we get this pending transaction into our actual blockchain up here? Well, the way that we do that is we have to mine a new block or create a new block. So let's do that right now. So after we create the new transaction, let's copy this and let's create a new block. And the nonce for this one we'll just make some other random number, and this hash we will make this value. It really doesn't matter at this point. This is just for testing. We'll make this one this value. Cool. So now we create a block, we create a transaction, and then we mine a block. So this transaction that we created should show up in our second block because we mine a block after we created a transaction. Let's see what we get. Great. So here we have our entire blockchain again, and it has two blocks in it, right? Because we mined two blocks. It has our first block, which has no transactions, and it has our second block here, which if you look at our transactions, it says there is an array, and it has items in it, versus this one, which has no items in it. So let's take a closer look at this transactions array. We should expect to find this transaction that we created in this transactions array. So to see that, we'll just log out bitcoin.chain, at position 1, which is the second block in our blockchain. So I'll save that and run the test file. Great. So we are simply logging out the second block in our chain, and you can see that for transactions, it has an array with one object in it. And this object is the transaction that we created right here, which is pretty cool. We basically just created a transaction and then mined it by creating a new block, or we mined a new block which now has our transaction in it, which is pretty cool. Let's do a couple more examples to help clarify what is happening here. So now let's take this createNewTransaction method and let's do it a couple more times. Let's do it 3 more times down here, and let's change the amounts here. We'll say this one is worth 50 Bitcoin, this one is worth 300 Bitcoin, and this one's worth, we'll say 2,000 Bitcoin. And we'll just leave these addresses as they are. It's not really a big deal for right now. Cool. So what's happening now? The same thing up top. We are creating a block. We are then creating a transaction. And then we are creating or mining a new block. So we should have one block with no transactions, one block with this one transaction in it. And then after we create our second block, we are creating 3 more transactions. At this point, all 3 of these transactions should be in our pending transactions array because we are not creating a new block after we create these 3 transactions. So if we save this file and we log out our Bitcoin blockchain, we should have 2 blocks in our chain, and we should have 3 transactions in the pending transactions array. Let's see what we get. Cool. So we have our blockchain, and in the chain we have 2 blocks, just like we expected to have. And in our pending transactions, we have 3 transactions, which are the 3 transactions that we created. Perfect. Cool. So now what do we want to do, or what do we have to do to get these pending transactions into our chain? Well, we have to mine another block. So let's do that now. Let's copy this line right here, and let's mine or create a new block. And we'll pass in a nonce of this value right here. Pass in a new hash. Doesn't really matter what it is right now. Cool. Make this one a little longer. Cool. So now, these 3 transactions that are pending, once we mine this new block, the 3 pending transactions should appear in our new block. Let's see what we get. Cool. So we have our blockchain, and we have a chain here. And it has 3 blocks in it, which is good. That's the amount of blocks that we created. And our pending transactions is now empty. So that's a good sign. But where did these 3 transactions go? Well, they should be in the last block that we created, which is this one right here. So inside of this 3rd block, we have our transactions, and it looks like we have some transactions in there, which should be the 3 transactions we just created. Let's take a deeper look by saying bitcoin.chain at position 2, which is the 3rd block, and we'll save that. And let's run this again. And this is our 3rd block in our chain. And as you can see in the transactions array, we have all 3 of the transactions that we created. Perfect. So that is how our createNewTransaction and our createNewBlock methods work with each other. It's pretty cool. If you are having a little bit of trouble understanding how both of these methods work or how they work together, I encourage you to just kind of mess around in your test.js file and create some new blocks, create some new transactions, log some different information out, and really just get a good idea of how this is working. This is pretty cool, and it's pretty essential to how blockchains actually work. We are essentially mining new blocks and placing our transactions into those blocks, which is pretty cool. Great. I'll see you in the next video.